Krishna, dear devotees from Sridham Mayapur. Shri Guru Nitai Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Bol. Jai Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Jai Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Jaya Gopi Janna Vallabha Jaya Giri Varadari Jaya Giri Jaya Giri Jaya Yashodanandana Jaya Raja Janarajana Jaya Jaya Yashodanandana Vanachari Jaya Jaya Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Jaya Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Narayanam namaskrityam naram shravanarotamam Devim saraswatim vyasam tato jayam udiraye Vede ramayane shaiva purane varate tata Adavande cha madhye cha hari savatsadiyate Mukam karoti vachalam brangum langayate girim Yat kripa tamaham vande Shri Gurum Dinataranam Paramananda Madhavam Paramananda He Madhava Kadunga Luchi Makaranda Say Makaranda Panakori Anande Bolo Hari Hari Harinka Name Vandavela Parikori Bechakadola Se chaka dolanka paraye manamo rahu niranjare manamo niranjare rahu ha Krishna boli jiva jao ha Krishna boli jao jiva mote udare radha dava mote udare radha dava mote udare radha dava. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 29. And today we're on text number 11 to 12, and we're going to speak something about the nature of nirguna-bhakti, or bhakti which is free from the modes of material nature, and how kata ruchi, or taste for having Krishna kata, is a symptom of Suddha bhakti. So this is text 11 to 12, chapter 29, the third canto, teachings of Lord Kapiladeva. Madguna shruti matrena mayi sargu hasaye manogatir adichina yata gangam baso mubaro lakshanam bhakti yogasya nirgunasya hidaritam ahoita yavavahita ya bhakti purushottame. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. The manifestation of unadulterated devotional service is exhibited when one's mind is at once attracted to hearing the transcendental name and qualities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is residing in everyone's heart. Just as the water of the Ganga flows naturally down toward the ocean, such devotional ecstasy, uninterrupted by any material condition, flows toward the Lord. Another translation of this I'd like to read too. The definition of transcendental bhakti yoga, or bhakti which is free from the modes of nature, is now illustrated. It is the unbroken tendency of the mind, Krishna, Lord Kapiladeva says, to be drawn to me, whose abode is the heart of hearts of everyone. Simply by hearing about my qualities, just like the water of the Ganga is drawn to the ocean. Reading from Srila Prabhupada's purport, the basic principle of this unadulterated, pure devotional service is love of Godhead. Madguna Shruti Matrena means, quote, just after hearing about the transcendental qualities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. These qualities are called nirguna. The Supreme Lord is uncontaminated by the modes of material nature, therefore he is attractive to the pure devotee. There is no need to practice meditation to attain such attraction. The pure devotee is already in the transcendental stage, and the affinity between him and the Supreme Personality of Godhead is natural and is compared to the Ganges water flowing toward the sea. The flow of the Ganges water cannot be stopped by any condition. Similarly, a pure devotee's attraction for the transcendental name, form, and pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead cannot be stopped by any material condition. The word avicchina, without interruptions, is very important in this connection. No material condition can stop the flow of the devotional service of a pure devotee. The word ahoitaki means without reason. A pure devotee does not render loving service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead for any cause or for any benefit, material or spiritual. This is the first symptom of unalloyed devotion. Anya bilasita shunyam. He has no desire to fulfill by rendering devotional service. Such devotional service is meant for the Purushottam, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and not for anyone else. Sometimes pseudo-devotees show devotion to many demigods, thinking the forms of the demigods to be the same as the Supreme Personality of Godhead's form. It is specifically mentioned herein, however, that bhakti, devotional service, is meant only for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Narayan, Vishnu, or Krishna, not for anyone else. Yavyahadita means, quote, without cessation. A pure devotee must engage in the service of the Lord 24 hours a day without cessation. His life is so molded that at every minute and every second he engages in some sort of devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Another meaning of the word avyavahita is that the interest of the devotee and the interest of the Supreme Lord are on the same level. The devotee has no interest but to fulfill the transcendental desire of the Supreme Lord. Such spontaneous service unto the Supreme Lord is transcendental and never contaminated by the material modes of nature. These are the symptoms of pure devotional service, which is free from all contamination of material nature. Gora graganya gana gotra galoruharam Gauranga Gudatama Gopyara Kopa Briksham Gopala Gadaratidam Yati Singha Gora Govinda Deshikavaram Satatam Namami Uttama Adama Kichuna Bachila Jachiya Dileka Kola Kahe Premananda Hemona Gauranga Hridaya Dadiya Bola Bhaja Gauranga Kaha Gauranga Laha Gaurangera Namare Chejana Gauranga Bhaje Se Hoyamara Pranare Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So good morning, dear devotees from Sridham Mayapur. We're discussing now the symptoms of Suddha Bhakti, or what Srila Prabhupada calls in the purport, nirguna-bhakti, which Jiva Goswami, in his Kramasandarbha commentary, calls Sarup Siddha Bhakti. And maybe we'll speak a little bit more about that. I think we may be on these couple of verses for a few days. We'll see how it goes. He says that this bhakti is nishkam. It means it has no personal desire. It's kevala bhakti. It's pure bhakti. Whereas the previous different types of bhakti were delineated and explained so that we could have some broad knowledge. And now he's speaking about pure bhakti. In his Sa'artha Darshani commentary, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains that this verse is speaking about how the mind, as Kapiladeva says, flows continuously to me, just by bhakti yoga with hearing and other processes beyond the gunas. And by this, the quality of bhakti is yavyahadita, or ahoitaki. Just as the water of the Ganga, even though it's turned back by the ocean's waves, it doesn't stop. Even though the Ganga is entering into the ocean, the waves are beating the river back, the river doesn't stop going into the ocean. He says, similarly, the mind flows only to me, even though it's allured by different offerings of material opulence and sarshi and salokya and other things, which we'll be hearing about in text 13 of this chapter. So Lokishashri Samipya Sarupi Kaptamapita Dhyamana Magrinati Vinamyat Sevamanjina. Another third verse speaking about Suddha Bhakti. These verses are very important. These two verses, as well as the next verse, they appear twice in Chaitanya Charitamrita. The first time is in Adi Lila chapter 4, which is significant because Adi Lila chapter 4 discusses the confidential reasons for the appearance of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So these verses, which describe the nature of Suddha Bhakti, beyond the modes of material nature, beyond the mode of goodness, this is one of the purposes for the appearance of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So these verses are very important. They're quoted many, many times by our acharyas in different places. We're not even going to try to discuss all the things that they say about it. It's too much. It's discussed quite a bit in 3 different places that I'm aware of by Jiva Goswami in his Sandarbhas, twice in Bhakti Sandarbha, in Anucheta 234 and I think it's 269, and also in Priti Sandarbha. Maybe we'll touch on a little bit of that. But it's also spoken about by Jiva Goswami and many of our acharyas. So Vishwanath, in his commentary on this verse, he says that just like the Ganga, like the mind of a devotee is like the Ganga. It's very fast, it's very cooling, it's pure, and it's worthy of worship. The Ganga has those qualities, these 4 different qualities, and they're also the same qualities of the mind of a devotee. The mind of a devotee is very fast. It's very cooling, it's pure, and it's worthy of worship in the same way as the Ganga. So he says this is a nature of bhakti that is devoid of having any other results in mind. It's a hoitaki. There's no other motivation. It's apratiyata. This is already discussed in the first canto of the Bhagavatam. It has no motivation and it's unhindered. It never stops. Just like you can't stop the Ganga from going into the ocean. And Vishwanath says that it's not like Gyan or Yoga because it's independent of other processes. Because bhakti is Gyan and Yoga are dependent upon bhakti. Therefore, Rupa Goswami, in his Pajavali, he says that Tame sadhyan sadhanam jivanam cha. That this bhakti, or he's speaking about the chanting of the holy name, which is the main principle of bhakti according to Jiva Goswami. Tanme sadhyan sadhanam jivanam cha. It's both the process and the result. You can't say that about Gyan or about karma. Yeah, it's both the process and the result. He says, Tanme sadhyan sadhanam jivanam cha. It's the sadhya, the goal of my life. It's the sadhana, the process by which I'm practicing. And it is my life. Tanme sadhyan sadhanam jivanam cha. But you can't say that about Gyan or Yoga. And even bhakti, which is in the modes of material nature, doesn't have the same quality. And Vishwanath says that in the first canto of the Bhagavatam, the first and 12th stages of bhakti, which he says is 12 different stages of bhakti. We'll touch on that in just a moment. He says that the first is sadhu sangha, and the 12th stage is prema. They should not be considered cause and effect. He says that the 12, rather, they're not cause and effect, they're perfect in and of themselves. The 12 stages are the mercy of the devotees. That's the first, bhakti kripa. The second is service to the devotees. The third is faith. The fourth is taking shelter of guru. The fifth is desiring to worship. The fifth is bhakti itself. Then the sixth is anartha nibriti. Seventh is nishta. The eighth is ruchi. The ninth is asakti. 10th is bhava. And then prema. That's 11. I don't know how we've got 11, 12 out of that. Anyway. So the nature of bhakti, again, is it's apratiyata. It never finishes. And it's avyahavita, as described in this verse. It's devoid of any blockage by karma or gyan, which are represented by sattva gun and raja gun. So therefore, bhakti is beyond the gunas, it's beyond the modes of material nature. And this is discussed in the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam, chapter 25. Sattvika karako sangi ragando rajasa smita tamasa smiti vibrasto nirguno mad apashraya. Krishna is speaking to Uddhava, and he speaks about someone who's a sattvika karak, or a worker who's free from attachment. He says asangi, he's free from attachment. He's sattvika karaka. He's a worker in the mode of goodness. He said ragando rajasa smita, someone who has their own personal desire and they're blinded by that personal desire. That's a worker in the mode of passion. In tamasa smriti vibrashto, smriti vibrashto, who can't tell what's right and wrong, that's a worker in the mode of ignorance. But nirguno madapashraya, the word nirguna is used, that worker who's free from the modes of material nature, who's madapashraya, who's taking shelter in me, and that's a very significant couple of words, madapashraya. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he quotes this verse in 11th canto to explain this verse today, and this phrase mad apashraya is very important. We're going to try to see if we can discuss this today, what a mad apashraya means here. That someone who takes shelter of me, they become transcendental. And what that apashraya, mad apashraya means, what it means to take shelter of me. Again, Vishwanath quotes in the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam, and he speaks there about shraddha, or about faith. First verse is speaking about the karaka, or the worker. The second verse is speaking about the person in faith. Satviki yatmiki shraddha, karma shraddha tu rajasi, tamasyadharame ya shraddha mad sevayam tu nirguna. Again, the word nirguna is used. He said that faith which is directed adhyatmiki shraddha, or toward the atma, toward the self. You understand, I'm not this body. That's in the mode of goodness. Karma shraddha tu rajasi, faith which is rooted in karma, that I have to do this or that, I want to better myself, and therefore I'm practicing bhakti. That's rajarsic faith. Tamasa adhyame yashraddha, faith which is residing in irreligious activities, is in tamagun. Someone is thinking that I'm going to criticize other persons, I'm going to criticize devotees. We were speaking the other day, it's such a nice thing that Bhakti Vigyan Maharaj is saying, why we don't take shelter of conspiracy theories, because they're critics. And someone who's a critic, we can't take shelter of that person. They have some bias. But they have some faith in this thing, and some people think this is very, very important. But this is faith in the mode of ignorance. He says, but matsevayam tu nirguna, faith in my service, that they have faith in my pure service, that's purely transcendental. So bhakti, which is covered by the modes of material nature, by the mode of ignorance, by the mode of passion, by the mode of goodness even, it's possible that some offenses may arise in that kind of bhakti. But perfect bhakti can't be covered by anything. And this is the point of this verse today. And therefore such a devotee, he can't fall down. Nothing can obstruct. The word yavyaharita in this verse, and avichina, meaning that it never stops and is continuous, indicates that nothing can cover, nothing can obstruct pure bhakti. Sridhar Swami in his Bhavarta Deepika commentary in this verse, he explains that the word avichina means that it's continuous or unending. It never ever stops. This is a really, really important point to understand. We're not like that. We're not on that platform. That's okay. We're not trying to beat anyone up. We're not trying to make anyone feel bad. Rather, we want to hear the truth. Because as we often comment, that illusion, no matter how cheerful, the truth, no matter how cheerful, no matter how depressing. The truth, no matter how depressing, is always preferable to illusion, no matter how cheerful it may be. And we can say so many things, as we often do, to new people when they come. You just one-time offer obeisances, it's amazing, and there's a Jamil, he was calling out for his son, he wasn't even thinking of Lord Narayan, and he got such a great benefit. There's so much benefit to bhakti. We speak like that quite often for new people. But here in this verse and purport by Srila Prabhupada, Lord Kapiladeva is speaking something a little stronger. And we should understand what is pure bhakti. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in one article, he says that if we don't understand what is pure bhakti, then we may misunderstand, we may take something which is mixed bhakti for being pure bhakti. And that's why Lord Kapiladeva spoke extensively, we spoke extensively about what is bhakti in the mode of ignorance, what is bhakti in the mode of passion, what is bhakti in the mode of goodness. So first of all, we want to negate these things. This is not bhakti. And don't confuse it for bhakti, even all the way up to someone performing Varnashram Dharma, and they may be thinking that this is my bhakti. It's not bhakti. It looks like bhakti. It looks very, very good, but it's not. So Jiva Goswami, again commenting on this verse, he says that this bhakti means it can't be disturbed by any other object. That's Suddha Bhakti. When we come to that point, the word, he says, avyaharita, means it's direct, it's not imposed. It's Sarup Siddha Bhakti. He says, Sarup Siddhat Vena Sakshat Rupa Natu Aropa Distat Vena Vyadadanika. He says that it's Sarup Siddha. It's natural. It's perfect bhakti. It's not a rope. A rope means you're assigning something else to it. You're assigning Varnashram to bhakti. You're saying this Varnashram activity, taking care of my wife, or me being a good dharma patni to my husband, that's my bhakti. That's not bhakti. That's, at best, that's a rope siddha bhakti. You're assigning something else to it. The word sarup siddha is very, very important. Just like fire has a potency to burn, and that potency to burn, you can't separate that potency from the fire. So similarly, bhakti is implicit in the nature of a perfected devotee. You can't separate bhakti and bhakta. You can't separate it. That's why it said yavyaharita, or without any abstraction, any separation, any cessation. A person in his sarup can't be separated by anything when they've realized that sarup. And therefore Chaitanya Mahaprabhu tells us in his Shikshastakam 4, Nadanam Najanam Nasundarim Kavitam Va Jagadisha Kamai Mama Janmani Janmanishwari Bhavatad Bhaktir Ohoitaki Twai, that the only thing that a pure devotee prays for is Suddha Bhakti. And he says, Mama Janmani Janmanishwari, even let me take birth again and again. Now, again, in the 13th verse, which we'll be going on to soon, Lord Kapiladeva describes to his mother the nature of this bhakti is that even they don't want any type of liberation. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has instructed Sanatana Goswami and these principles, very important thing to understand. Prabhu kohe Vaishnav deha, prakrita kabu noya, aprakrita deha bhaktir Chid Ananda Moya. He says that Vaishnava Deha Prakrita Kabunoi, it's never material. It's never under the influence of the three modes of material nature. Rather, Aprakrita Deha, his body is transcendental because Bhaktira Chid Anandamoy. It's the devotee's body is simply made out of pure transcendental bliss. So therefore, this Suddha Bhakti is manifested in the form of Kata Ruchi. And we can see when someone has Kata Ruchi, that's the symptom of Suddha Bhakti. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu goes on to explain this to Sanatana Goswami in very, very deep verses, which we're going to try to explain today. Diksha Kale Bhakta Kore Atma Samarpana Se Kale Krishna Tare Kore Atma Sama. Okay, when does that happen? When does the body of the devotee become transcendental? That's an important question, isn't it? Mahaprabhu says, very, very heavy thing. Diksha Kali, at the time of initiation. If someone is Atma Samarpana, if someone is completely surrendered, and again, this is the point which was being made in the 11th canto verse, which Vishwanath's quoting, and he says, Mad Apashraya, that someone who's taking complete shelter of me, that person is nirguna. They're free from the modes of material nature. So when does that take place? Mahaprabhu tells Sanatana Goswami it takes place at the time of initiation. Someone may raise a hand. Hello, didn't happen to me. Diksha Kali Bhakta Kori Atma Samarpana. If you're Atma Samarpana, if you're completely surrendered, then Sei Kali. Sei Kali means at that time. Krishna Tari Kori Atma Sam. Krishna considers that devotee who's been initiated, is completely surrendered, to be equal to himself. Sei Deha, at that time, that body. Sei Deha Tare, Kori Chidanandamoya. At that time, that body becomes transcendental. And Aprakrita Dehe, Tar Charana Bhajoy. In that spiritual body, the devotee serves the lotus feet of the Lord. Therefore, for that reason, devotees are not allowed to worship the deity until they're dikshit, until they're initiated. And when they're dikshit, they have that mantra, then at that time, they have a prakrit deha, they have a transcendental body, and therefore they can worship the Lord. It's not possible to worship the Lord without that. So this Sarup Shakti is there from the very beginning. When someone has Shraddha, if that Shraddha, as being described previously, we're building on these points. I'm trying to look back at them because it's a lot of points we're going to build on. In the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam, Vishwanath describes how the nature of this bhakti, he describes it in two ways. The Satika Karaka, the worker, and the quality of faith, the Shraddha. So the quality of transcendental faith is that the devotee, he's completely surrendered to Krishna. That's the result of that transcendental faith. So this type of faith, which is being described here now by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, by Sanatana Goswami, which is very relevant for our discussion today, this type of faith is based on this Atma Samarpana. When someone completely surrenders, and then they get a completely transcendental body. And that faith is not tamasic, rajasic, or sattvika shraddha. It's Andaranga Shakti. It's a manifestation of the Lord himself when they have that type of faith. And such devotees, they're beyond the modes of material nature. They're beyond the nartas. There's no pride. There's no envy in such a personality. Those kind of things don't take place in Uttam Bhakti, which Lord Kapiladeva is speaking about here. In the very beginning of Uttam Bhakti, Rupa Goswami says, Kleshagni. In the very beginning, the first thing is all your klesha is gone. Kleshagni Shubhada, Moksha Lagutakrit. In the very beginning, the first thing is all your suffering and anxieties go away. All your, in his commentary, Jiva Goswami explains that it means that all your anarthas go away immediately. When we begin practicing bhakti, all the anarthas are gone. So then someone may question, how is it that we see that someone, they may be accepting guru, but they still are going through these different stages of anartha nibritti, etc. They're still dealing with the modes of material nature. They're still trying to purify their heart because we haven't yet, speaking to myself, we haven't yet come to the point of saranagati in the proper sense. If that saranagati is properly done, then there's no more anarthas. And the body becomes completely transcendental. The only possibility of anartha still at that point is if someone commits some offense. This is explained by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and Madhurya Kadambini. So bhakti actually therefore begins, Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains in some of his articles, it begins with Shastriya Shraddha. He says there's two broad types of faith. And I think I'm going to explain these two broad types of faith in a couple of subcategories of them, and we're going to stop here today because it's a lot to digest. I think there's a lot of technical things. I'd like to look back a little bit and try to review so we can hopefully digest this. There's Lokik Shraddha and there's Paramartik Shraddha. Lokik Shraddha means common faith. It's faith which is under the modes of material nature. Someone has that faith. It may be tamasic in the mode of ignorance, rajarsic in the mode of passion, it may be sattvic in the mode of goodness. They may have faith in bhakti because they think that if I study Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, then I can kick butt on all the swamis. And I can become a great personality. I can defeat other people if I study all these shastras. They have some faith, but that's tamasic faith. Someone may have faith in some sadhu because everybody else does. That's rajarsic faith. Or they may have some faith in the mode of goodness, but it's not deeply based on it's based more on Varnashram Dharma and the desire for liberation. And therefore we don't really consider to be Shastriya Shraddha. The Shastriya Shraddha is Paramartik Shraddha, transcendental faith. And in that transcendental faith, there's no touch of the modes of nature. In that transcendental faith, there's two subdivisions again. This is explained by Bhaktivinoda Thakur in his commentary in the first verse of Shikshashtaka. He says, Shashastra avadarnamoyi shraddha. Shashastra, it's faith in Shastra. And that type of faith, which is Shastriya Shraddha, both Paramartik Shraddha, there's two types of faith. Both of them we can consider in one sense to be Shastriya Shraddha, or faith based on Shastra. But the first is that they get hung up on that limit. And they can't go beyond Shastra. And Bhaktivinoda says that it's characterized by some quality of fear. They're thinking, I have to follow all the rules and regulations of Shastra, and if I don't, then I'm going to go to hell. So that's Sa-Shastra Avardhamoyi Shraddha. And then there's Bhagavat Lila Madhurja Lobhamoyi Shraddha, the second type of transcendental faith, which he explains. Second type of paramartic faith, he explains in his commentary on Shikshashtaka. And that is characterized by the word lobha, or greed. Someone has some greed, which comes about by association with a pure devotee. And the one is Vaidhi Bhakti, and the other leads to Raganuga-bhakti. When we hear a pure devotee speaking Krishna Katha, it attracts the heart. And such a person, Krishna says in the Gita, Mamaiviye prapadyante mayami tam tarantite, that those surrendered in me through Guru, then they cross beyond Maya. So that this surrender, which is spoken about by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu here, this Atma Samarpana, which comes at the time of Diksha, means their body becomes completely transcendental. And it can happen like that, immediately. So let's just review some of the points we went over today, because we covered a lot of different things. And we've only gone a very short distance in what I wanted to speak about. We discussed about how this verse speaks of Swarup Siddha Bhakti, which is free from the modes of material nature. And it's characterized as it's a hoitaki and a pratiyata. It's yavahavita. It can't be stopped. And this is the nature of someone, when they've come to this point of bhakti, their mind runs to Krishna. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he says that the mind, the example, the Ganga in this verse, suggests the mind of a devotee. And just like the Ganga has these four qualities, it's very fast, it's cooling, it's pure, and it's worthy of worship, similarly is the mind of a devotee. And how this bhakti is free from material modes of material nature, because it's characterized by this quality of Atma Samarpana, of complete surrender. And if we're, even though someone may be initiated, and Krishna says again, Diksha Kala Bhakti Kori Atma Samarpana, that when at the time of initiation, say Kali Krishna Tari Kori Atma Sam, Krishna says that that devotee's body, it's equal to mine. It's Anandamoya, it's completely transcendental body. That takes place when we're Atmasam, when we completely surrendered to Krishna, Atma Samarpana. And if we're not completely surrendered to Krishna, then we see these different bad qualities within us. We see these different anarthas. That means that we're having to go through these different stages because Saranagati hasn't taken place yet in the proper way. So we should understand that. So I'm going to stop there. A lot of different topics today. I hope the devotees are able to digest some of this. We're going to go on. We have a lot of different examples. Actually, I'd like to just give at least one example today before we stop. So we have a few more minutes. This is a wonderful example. Many, many different examples are there in the lives of our acharyas. I'd like to speak something about, from a book, the Bhaktamala, which is a description of different devotees, from the life of Lokanath Goswami. And it said some very interesting things there. Lokanath Goswami was one of the eternal associates of Mahaprabhu, and his qualities are all very sublime and wonderful. And he had these symptoms that we're hearing about in these verses. He was always very, very eager to hear and chant about Krishna. Right? And he was so fond of reciting the Bhagavatam. He had this kata ruchi that he considered that anyone who has similar attachment, that person's his dear friend. And said that once he was walking down the street and he saw a devotee as he was walking reciting the Bhagavatam as he was walking. And Lokanath Goswami became so attracted to that he ran after that devotee and he fell down at his lotus feet. And in this way he showed his symptoms. How the mind of the devotee is so attached to Krishna. You're walking down the street, you see some devotee reciting a few verses from the Bhagavatam, and immediately runs after and falls down at the feet of that devotee. So this is such an example of this verse today. Madguna shuti matrena mai sarva guasaye mano gatir avichtina yata gangam baso muda lakshanam bhakti yogasya nirgunasya yaduritam ahoicha yavita ya bhakti purushottame. The manifestation of unadulterated devotional service is exhibited when one's mind is at once attracted to hearing the transcendental name and qualities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who's residing in everyone's heart. Just as the water of the Ganga flows naturally toward the ocean, such devotional ecstasy, uninterrupted by any material condition, flows toward the Supreme Lord. And in the second translation, the definition of transcendental bhakti yoga now is given after we've heard about bhakti in the mode of ignorance, passion, and goodness. And what is the transcendental bhakti yoga? It's nirguna. It's the unbroken tendency of the mind to be drawn to Krishna, whose abode is the heart of hearts of everyone. Just by hearing about my qualities, just like the water of the Ganga is drawn to the ocean. So if anybody has any reflections, any comments that help you digest things, it's a good time for Anapani. You have something? Why don't you come up here and give Anapani Radha the microphone.
Thank you so much. I really like this verse. It's so beautiful. And it's immediately remind me the verse from this 8th chapter of 1st canto. Yeah, Tvaya Ananya Vishaya. And I was thinking, so if that verse, like 11th verse in this 29th chapter, is a definition of unalloyed bhakti. So the prayer of Kunti, it's prayer for the unalloyed bhakti, basically. Yes. So it's really interesting. So thank you.
Very nice reflection. Thank you. I was also thinking, Satchitananda Prabhu, you have something? We have our Bhagavatam program here every day, but we don't just recite Bhagavatam. We like to hear from devotees. We take different turns during the week, and we like to hear comments and reflections from devotees. Then it goes very deep. The Bhagavatam itself says, Parasparanu katanam pavanam bhagavadi. So this is the nature of Bhagavatam. It should be paraspara, or back and forth.
Thank you. In hearing all the scriptures that you've been giving about the different stages of bhakti and the topmost bhakti, So in this regards, someone might think, woo, it's a long ways to go actually to get to that stage of pure bhakti. And sometimes you hear a statement where it says that Prabhupada actually one time was given a lecture, and I hear this many times. Devotees always say that Prabhupada was saying that you have to be like 100% pure. And you heard that one, right? And then he saw the faces of the devotees, and he's like, oh my God, there's no hope for me. Then, okay, 90%. And then still, devotees are like, their heads down. 80%. It's like, ah. And then finally, at one point, he says 70%. So the point being that obviously this is very elaborated, very technical. We have to learn these things. It's good to know these things. But here the Acharya comes and gives you that, opens the door on the back for you. He says, oh, come this way. I have a personal relationship with Krishna. It's almost like, and maybe you can comment more.
Yeah. When you were speaking, it reminded me of one devotee who surrendered immediately and came to the platform, in my humble opinion and understanding of Suddha Bhakti, and that's Jayananda Prabhu. He just immediately surrendered to Srila Prabhupada. And he didn't go through all these different stages and whatever. He just completely surrendered. So it's possible like that if we just completely surrender to Guru. But the important thing is to surrender to Guru, to this person. Exactly. And as you were pointing out, Srila Prabhupada very kindly to encourage the devotees, he said at least 70%, 80, 90%, 100, at least 70% should be done. Prabhupada's very, very much encouraging in that way. But I would suggest, my understanding of that is we have to come to the point of 100%. If we don't come to the point of ahoitakir pratiyata, unmotivated, uninterrupted devotional service, then it's mixed with some other mode of nature, and it's not perfect. So then what does Srila Prabhupada mean by saying this? That you just surrendered this much to me, and I'll give you mercy. Mm-hmm. That's how I understand it, and you'll come to this point. But I would also take it to understand that it doesn't necessarily mean that we are at that point. A devotee once asked Guru Maharaj a very awkward kind of question. He said, how do we understand that Srila Prabhupada appointed these original gurus in our society? And Guru Maharaj said that he appointed them. He said there was no fault in Srila Prabhupada, but there was a fault in those devotees, that they should have waited until they were qualified. Even though they got some position, they should have waited until they were qualified. So based on that comment, which is, I think, a logical, obvious point, the Prabhupada said 70% at least, and these are the persons Prabhupada appointed as guru, but they weren't completely surrendered, obviously. They should have waited until that time came. That would be my understanding. You have something further?
At one point you were mentioning too, I can't remember what was the reason you mentioned this, but I'm going to try to see if I can come up with a question. You said that sometimes just to encourage a new bhakta, you can say, oh, just by paying your obeisances, just by reading prasadam one time, by doing this. So a question came to my mind. How is it that sometimes, when you read a chapter of Krishna book or any chapter of very important, it says, just by reading or listening this at the end, if you listen to this chapter, immediately you're liberated, you're going back to Godhead. How can you reconcile that? Because that statement is like right there in the scriptures and the one that you just mentioned.
I've done a lot of reading with devotees over the years, as you've done also. I've never seen anybody, while reading, all of a sudden the Vaikuntha airplane comes down and they jump on the airplane and they leave right at that time. But Prabhupada says that there's no difference between a ripe mango and a green mango, in the sense that the green mango will become ripe at some day. It's a mango. Mm-hmm. And so someone who's beginning this surrender, they're doing this reading, they're doing something, they're going to get the fruit of that sooner or later when they come to that point. Mm-hmm. Lynn's asked a question. Does the fear of those who have faith in the Shastras and don't wish to break the rules, the fear that keeps them from full surrender, Does the greed of those in the Lobha faith a necessary quality to launch one into full surrender? Thank you. Not necessarily. Someone, if they have Shastriya Shraddha, then they may also completely surrender. But Jiva Goswami, in Anucheta 234 of his Bhakti Sandarbha, when he quotes these particular verses, he goes through an elaborate discussion of them. And then he comes to Anucheta 235, which speaks about Vaidhi Bhakti. And that's the devotee who has Shastriya Shraddha. They're surrendered, but they're practicing Vaidhi Bhakti because they're not spontaneous. Vaidhi Bhakti means that they're following rules and regulations, and it's predominated by that. Whereas an example we gave from Bhakti Vinod, that the greed of those persons who have Lobha, that it launches them in a quicker way. We can say that. To launch them in the full surrender. Yes, it's faster. I see your point. Your point is about how quick it is. So yes, I would agree with that. It's much quicker. Krishna Kun, did you have something? You have a look on your face. You got to come here. Speak in the mic.
I have two things. I was really struck by this point that these verses are particularly quoted in the 4th chapter of Adi Lila,
Yes.
because Mahaprabhu's the reasons for his appearance are described there, and how this is Srimati Radharani's property, this pure devotional service, and it reminded me of Srila Prabhupada speaking in the Nectar of Devotion about how devotional service is under the direction, under the control of Srimati Radharani. And of course, we also know Davihi and Saguna-bhakti. So this is what Mahaprabhu came to give in her mood. And this is very important. And the other thing that came to my mind is this verse that that you can read out from here, Pure Devotional Service, because it gives such it's a kind of a reflection on Sachaitanya Prabhu's reflection.
Oh, very good. Actually, it's about a topic that I wanted to speak about in a later session also. Anyway, this is, Krishna Kun found this nice verse from the 2nd chapter of the 11th canto, text 12. Shruto nupatito dhyata adrito vanumodita sadhya punati saddharmo deva vishva druho pihi. Pure devotional service rendered to the Supreme Lord is spiritually so potent that simply by hearing about such transcendental service, by chanting its glories in response, by meditating on it, by respectfully and faithfully accepting it, or by praising the devotional service of others, even persons who hate the demigods and all other living entities, can be immediately purified. What is the significance in this verse of stating that even those persons who are Vishwadruha, who are hateful to the demigods and hateful to everybody in the universe, even they can immediately be purified? Sometimes we see tamasic bhaktas, devotees in the mode of ignorance, and they hate the demigods. What does it mean to hate the demigods? It means to hate the temple president. It means to hate the GBC, because the demigods are persons who are managing the devotional activities of the Lord. They're managing the universe on behalf of the Lord. And they're sakama bhaktas. They're not pure devotees. We don't worship them because they're pure devotees, but we give respect to them because they're appointed by the Lord. And sometimes even persons, they may hate them, but if they meditate on pure devotional service, as we're hearing about in these verses today, then they can be purified of that. A great fault. Very interesting topic. And I'd like to speak more about that and the importance of meditating on the devotees and what it means and what Rupa Goswami says about that. But in our session coming up on Sunday, our next session, we're going to speak something more about this Saranagati and the relationship between Saranagati and Kata Ruchi. How this Kata Ruchi comes is a very scientific and very, very deep topic. We're speaking about these topics. This verse indicates someone who's already surrendered, but we're not yet to that point, and we need to hear about the glories of the surrender, and therefore Bhakti Vinod stressed it so very, very much. So I want to thank everybody again for taking part in our program on Srimad Bhagavatam. Our Guru Maharaj used to say, if you don't do any other sadhana, just every day you hear Srimad Bhagavatam. That's the best. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Samaveda Bhakta Binda ki jai, Vanchakalpa Darubhischa, Kripa Sindhu